Welcome to Letters and Politics. I'm Mitch Jeserich. We are nearing the end, though we're not quite there yet, of the first 100 days of the Biden presidency. Now, this notion of the first 100 days of a new administration aggressively implementing its policy agenda dates back to 1933, when a new FDR administration moved quickly to address the Great Depression. Though it is worth pointing out that many of those initiatives that would later become part of what we remember as the New Deal would actually come after the 100 days. But nonetheless, today we are going to reflect on these first 100 days of the Biden administration with somebody who has been covering and writing about it on a daily basis, and that is David Dayen. David Dayen is the executive editor of the American Prospect. He currently is authoring the Prospect magazine special series called First 100, an in-depth look at President Biden and the new administration. He is also the author of the book Monopolized: Life in an Age of Corporate Power. And his latest featured piece for American Prospect is called Corporate Merger Aims to Build a Water Privatization Giant. That actually is related to the infrastructure bill, and we will talk to him about that as well. He joins us over Zoom. David Dayen, always a great pleasure, sir, to have you on this radio program. Thank you for taking the time.
Sure, Mitch. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're now at day 85, and just for full disclosure, I asked you that before we began the
I thought
interview.
You track.
We're at day 85 of the first 100 days, so we're not fully through it yet, but we almost are. We're approaching it. We're really just 2 weeks away from ending this period. You've been chronicling it on a daily basis since January 20th. What stands out to you? What are your general thoughts about these first 85 days of the Biden administration?
So I think that it was clear when Joe Biden was inaugurated that he had one job, and that job was to get as many vaccinations into as many arms as possible. When Biden started, the average shots per day was something around 700,000, 800,000 a day. We are now at 3.3 million shots a day over the last week. He had a goal of 100 million shots in arms in the first 100 days. We're going to hit probably 225, 230 million in that first 100 days. So by that measure, considering the importance of that, not just for public health, but for the comeback of the economy, you have to say that he's been successful. I mean, that it was not a guarantee that you would be able to roll out these vaccines in this time allotted with such force. I mean, here in California, starting tomorrow, across the state, every adult is able to, over the age of 16, is able to get a vaccine. We've seen take-up rates among senior citizens of well over 75, 80% who have received at least one shot. So I think you have to look at it in that light as successful. And then, you know, the emergency bill, the American Rescue Plan, which was properly sized at $1.9 trillion. It helped the vaccine effort by adding a number of funds to get this vaccine rolling, to get it out to pharmacies, to get it out to large mass vaccination sites. That also, I think, was a success. And everything else has been sort of conjectural with the Biden administration. We have an infrastructure plan that exists on paper, obviously hasn't been passed yet. We have a budget that is on paper. Usually presidential budgets are thrown right in the garbage. So everything else is sort of remains to be seen. But if you think about what needed to be done right away, it was vaccinations and rescue, and we are getting that to an extent.
It does seem to me now the idea of the first 100 days of administration again has been going on since the FDR presidency, and it's an artificial timeline. But it sort of seems like every president since, it's been kind of a disappointment those first 100 days. This, at least in my lifetime as a journalist, is probably the most significant, I would say the most significant 100 days that I have personally seen.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that it is so focused helped Biden. That we knew that there was really one thing that needed to be done, right? And usually a president comes in, there's this cascading series of things that require attention. And that was true here too. I mean, we have a student debt crisis, we have foreign policy crises that have to be dealt with. And Biden has been haphazard, I think, in some of those other areas. But because of the significance of the pandemic, that has really focused attention. So if you're looking at sort of a media lens or even a sort of public opinion lens, the attention has been on the virus and the vaccine. And Biden has done a good job there. So necessarily, it looks like, well, this is really good. And then the other thing that it's important to say about these first 100 days is that Biden has really broken the spell that deficit hawks have had over presidencies for the last 50 years, saying that you have to trim your sails, that you can't overspend. The fact not only that the American Rescue Plan went forward pretty much at the same level that it was proposed, but that talks of overheating and runaway inflation and things like that were really vociferously defended and rebutted, shows that Biden was disinterested in listening to the types of people who have been listened to traditionally in administrations, particularly Democratic administrations, over the last several decades. And that's important, the mindset changing. That's certainly important. And we've seen it in a budget request that goes beyond what has been in previous budgets, although it's still, because there were such cuts, it's not back to the levels, say, before the Reagan budgets or anything like that. But it is a significant boost. The infrastructure plan, multi-trillion-dollar plan, obviously isn't as concerned, even though that is paid for largely through corporate tax increases. Just shows that there is an ambition here, and that deficit concerns are not getting in the way of that ambition. So that's also.
How real do you think that is?
Well,
you're a journalist. You want to, stay with the facts, and I'm asking you to sort of guess a little bit here, obviously. So a bit of an unfair question, but I think there are probably a lot of people out there, some people out there, who are thinking that we're being hoodwinked at this moment.
Well, it was certainly real in the case of the American Rescue Plan. I mean, that was a $1.9 trillion bill that wasn't paid for, that came on the heels of $3 trillion in other pandemic rescue packages. So we did get this expansion in the child tax credit and making it advanceable. Starting in July, families will start getting a monthly check because just by virtue of the fact of them having children. The $1,400 checks, that did happen, the boost in unemployment insurance, and all of these things, I don't think you can deny that, right? And they certainly did a good job in defending their position and saying this is a public need, and we're going to fill this public need before we worry about the long run deficit implications 10 years down the road, which you probably can't decipher anyway. So it is real in that context. We don't know what the budget is going to yield. We don't know what this infrastructure plan is going to look like. And so I don't think it's worth putting Biden on Mount Rushmore yet. I mean, there is, I think, too much loose talk about these parallels between Biden and FDR. We got to wait a second. We got to wait until some of these things are implemented and implemented well. We got to wait until more than just emergency measures get passed. The child tax credit increase only lasts for 1 year. The increased subsidies under the Affordable Care Act that makes it cheaper for people to buy health insurance only lasts for 2 years. Those were in the American Rescue Plan. And so until we get something that's lasting, I don't think we can go out there and say that this is one of the best presidencies in history or anything. But what we can say is that there was a moment here where vaccinations and pandemic relief were required, and Biden is meeting that test.
Yeah. Seems to me this infrastructure bill, the $2.3 trillion infrastructure bill, is really key to what the early period of Biden's presidency is going to be remembered for, because with the $1.9 trillion American Recovery Act that you mentioned was already approved, that's sort of a huge boost to the economy and injection of a lot of money, but not a lot of things in there are permanent. And maybe they'll make some things, as you were mentioning, the child tax credit permanent, but at the moment, it's not permanent. It's infrastructure where you start to get some, I would think, structural things in place to address the economy long term. And right now, there's going to be a huge debate over what that infrastructure plan is going to look like. And it's just not a debate between Democrats and Republicans. It's a debate between Democrats. And basically, we live in a political world now in which everything is a party line vote. And if you have a 50-50 tie in the Senate, you're going to need every single Democrat in order to get something through. In the House, it's even dicey now with the death of Alcee Hastings. You only have a very small margin in the House of Representatives right now as well. And Joe Manchin is playing a key role, Democrat from West Virginia, a more conservative Democrat. He penned an op-ed piece last week in the Washington Post saying that under no circumstances would he support changing the weakening the filibuster or doing away with the filibuster altogether. And he was also very, very critical about using a procedure known as budget reconciliation, which allowed Democrats to pass the American Recovery Act, and sort of think that's what they're going to have to use to get an infrastructure bill through. So what do the politics look like for Democrats here in the months ahead?
The politics are going to be a slog on the infrastructure package. Only one half of it has been announced formally. There's a second half that is more social welfare-based stuff. Free community college probably will be in there, and maybe a permanent situation for that child tax credit increase. I think that certainly having to get every member of the Democratic caucus together, and practically every member of the Democratic caucus in the House, certainly every member in the Senate and almost every member in the House, is going to be a wrenching prospect. When you're talking about emergency relief, I think it's easier to form a consensus. But when you're talking about these lasting types of infrastructure pieces, when you're talking about the need to direct those resources to individual legislators throughout the country, that it's going to be difficult. We're already seeing things like the New York delegation in Congress saying that you have to repeal the cap on the state and local tax deduction, which is a gift to largely upper middle class households in high tax states like California, but also New York and New Jersey. They say that has to be in there in order for them to pass the bill. Those kinds of things are going to come up, and it's going to make it very difficult. I think ultimately something will happen, but we don't know what. And that the fact sheet that the Biden team put out had a huge amount of policy in it. I mean, just reams of policy. So much so that it was a 25-page document that had all these policy issues that were only discussed in a line or a paragraph. I mean, there was so much packed in there that we don't have the details of how these things will work. And we've been doing a series called Building Back America over at prospect.org that talks about these various policy pieces and how they could go right or how they could go wrong. So for example, there's a position in there to add 500,000 electric vehicle chargers all around the country. Well, the problem with that is that Tesla has a proprietary charging mechanism, and other electric automakers have proprietary mechanisms, and there's no standardization. It's like if Toyota had its own way, its own nozzle for filling it with gas. How would you, if you bought a Toyota, would be difficult under the current gas station infrastructure? You'd have to find a Toyota gas station, right? Well, if we're putting out a standard of 500,000 public electric charging stations, we have to figure out a standardization for that, or else people have to carry around a bunch of different nozzle adapters to allow their particular auto to be charged by these systems. And that's just one example among many within this. I wrote about lead, replacing all the lead pipes in America. We don't know where they are. It will take years to actually survey where those lead pipes are. And there's a question of, are you going to replace everything up to a property owner's lot line, or are you going to replace what's within that line? Because if you just replace what's public in the utility, you can make the situation worse because you create additional corrosion if you cut off a lead pipe in the middle. So these are just examples of where we need more detail. We need a lot more detail on what we're actually going to be doing. And that will be the difference between this being a bold and important infrastructure package and something that's more of a half measure.
This is Letters on Politics, and we are in conversation with David Dayen. He's the executive editor of the American Prospect. You could read his writings at prospect.org, plus many other journalists who write for the American Prospect as well. David Dayen, I think that this $400 billion portion of the infrastructure bill that was proposed for elderly and disabled care is really significant, important, and it also seems to be one of the more controversial aspects of it because especially Republicans are claiming this isn't infrastructure. This is social spending. But the way I think a lot of people see it, the way I see it, is that we are an aging society. We've gone through several major economic crises now in which many people have lost a lot. I see a future here in which there's going to be a lot of people who aren't going to have the funds available to fully support themselves as they get older. And last week in a speech, Joe Biden and others have called it an economy of caring, which also seems like a paradigm shift to me. But the more you read about sort of the politics about this $400 billion proposal, it seems like that might be one of the things that could be negotiable in trying to get to a deal. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that would be a real mistake to negotiate down from that. Moving us towards home and community-based care is absolutely essential. First of all, it's where people want to live out their days. It's strongly preferred over nursing homes and assisted living facilities. Number two, it's the fastest growing job profession in the United States is home care workers. It's also one of the lowest paid. The average is about $12 an hour. And if we're going to have an economy that works and break this terrible inequality problem that we have to take the jobs of the future that we know will be there, and home care workers are certainly one of them, and make that a good paying living wage job. And so this investment is absolutely critical to that. It would end or at least make a serious dent in the backlog of people who want home and community-based care. It would increase wages so that they're not poverty rate wages, so that home care workers don't have to work, multiple different jobs in multiple different environments. And we saw during the pandemic when, with respect to nursing homes, when nursing home workers had to work at different care facilities because they're just having one job wasn't enough to pay the bills. That spread the virus from different facilities to others and created much of the problem that we see, where we've had an absolute carnage in nursing homes, well over 100,000 people dead. So this is really critical. care is absolutely infrastructure. We did an entire special issue about this last year, and you can find it at prospect.org/family care. This is a gap in our safety net. We do not provide enough care for families, whether at the beginning of life in childcare, and early childhood education, whether during life through paid family leave and medical leave, or whether at the end of life through elder care and long-term services and supports. And this absolutely has to be part of the conception of what government can help with and provide for citizens. It's crucially important. I'm glad to see it in there, and I expect to see more investments in other parts of the family care apparatus with paid family leave and childcare investments in the second half announcement of this package.
What do you think the politics around this $400 billion for elderly and disabled care are? Because I ask that, I think most of us, if you haven't yet, you will have had to deal with elderly family members and care and realize, the challenge that represents. It would seem like to me everyone would get that, yet this is this is considered a very controversial aspect of the infrastructure bill.
There's a huge constituency for it. You're absolutely right. Everyone has is either getting care or will be getting care at some point in their life, or had gotten care at some point in their life, or they're providing care or will be providing care. That's the constituency. The constituency is everyone. And I think Republicans are kind of trying to make this argument that to segregate infrastructure and use that title, that phrase to sort of confine the scope of the bill. But when you think about this in terms of needs within society, it's absolutely true that we need some more help here. And these are as I've had it described, job enabling jobs. When you have someone who has a living wage job providing for elderly or disabled individuals, then the burden is not shared then on the backs of the families. And that family member can maybe go to work instead of spending their time in the important work of caring for their loved one. So these are economy boosting professions, economy boosting jobs. And I think the politics are very positive here, actually. And we've seen activism that's led to real results in increasing investments at the state level on these kinds of things. Washington State in particular is moving toward more of a universal benefit for long-term care, long-term care insurance plan. So I think that there's a real opportunity here, and it's good that the Biden administration is talking about it.
Are the Democrats going to be able to keep themselves together? I was going to say keep their majority, but I don't mean actually for 2022. And that's a different question, which I think if people can say they're better off come the end of 2022 than they were in 2020, they have a very good chance of bucking that trend of the party in power losing in the midterm elections. But that's actually what I'm asking here. What I'm asking here is, with such a small majority, can they keep it together, do you think? What do you think the challenges there are going to be?
I think the one question is intimately connected to the other. If Democrats want to be successful, if they want to have a successful presidency and a successful time, they want to continue their majority through to 2022, they're going to have to make tangible benefits in people's lives. People are going to have to see that Democrats in power enabled them to pass policies that had a real impact. And that extends to using executive actions too, where Biden had sort of a flurry at the beginning of his presidency, but it's tailed off since then. Yesterday, Senator Elizabeth Warren held a hearing about student debt and the ability for Joe Biden to cancel up to $1.7 trillion in student debt. They have not moved on that. There's apparently a process through the Education Department, through the Justice Department to look at the legal underpinnings of it. These kinds of things, and it's not just student debt, but drug prices and using procurement policy to improve conditions for workers. There are all sorts of things you can do with existing authority, and that's going to have to be a part of the picture too. But Democrats have to know that sticking together is a matter of their own party's survival as a governing party. They had better stick together and find a consensus among themselves, or else they're likely, if they don't show the benefit of a Democratic majority, there's likely not to be a Democratic majority come 2 years from now.
Did Joe Manchin throw a wrench into the machine there with his op-ed last week about the filibuster and budget reconciliation?
Well, I mean, I think embedded in that was Manchin showing a way for the process to work for him, in that you have to bring Republicans into the process, give them every opportunity to contribute to the discussion and sign on to a solution, exhaust those opportunities. And if it doesn't work, we can move towards the budget reconciliation process, which is the way in which a majority, simple majority in the Senate, only 50 votes, can actually pass any priority that they want, as long as it's budget related. So I think Manchin ultimately that's where he will go, but he will demand certain factors on the bill, as he did in the American Rescue Plan by changing changing the dates on unemployment insurance and changing the federal boost from $400 to $300. There are going to be things like that. So Manchin can, I guess, say that he made a difference. You hope that every senator isn't like that, that we're doing these things in a paint by numbers fashion to just sort of please individual members. But I think that I don't think there are the votes for the filibuster. Even if Manchin said, okay, I'll do it, I don't think there are 50 votes to change the filibuster right now. I think that Democrats kind of have to see whether or not Republicans are going to play along, which is ridiculous because we know Republicans aren't going to sign on to these important things like voting rights legislation or public financing legislation. They're just not going to do it. But it needs to be demonstrated once again, I guess, that Republicans are interested mostly in obstructing. So we'll see what happens, but there's certainly a path to make a lot of tangible progress. And Manchin has to ask himself, do I want to be in the majority or the minority? And how much pushing against this am I going to do before I blow it for my party?
David Dayen has been our guest. David Dayen is executive editor of the American Prospect magazine. You can read it at prospect.org. He's also authoring for the Prospect magazine the special series First 100, an in-depth look at President Biden and the new administration. He is the author of the book Monopolized: Life in an Age of Corporate Power. And his latest featured piece at prospect.org is called Corporate Merger Aims to Build a Water Privatization Giant. I meant to talk to you about that, David. You do connect that to the infrastructure bill.
Yeah. So we know that there's going to be this big pot of money out there, right? That if this infrastructure bill passes, there's going to be trillions of dollars moving into state and local infrastructure and planning facilities to whether it's roads, whether it's bridges, whether it's all kinds of things, including water systems and water treatment facilities. And what happened on Monday is that Veolia and Suez, which are two of the largest private water companies in the world, they're both French, announced a merger with each other to create an even larger behemoth. And this is going to be a company that will will basically say to state water agencies, we have a ton of expertise to manage these facilities. You should give it to us. And the concern is that so much of this multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure bill will then be seized by privatizers, by consultants, by financiers, and used to their own devices. The way that water privatization works is that every dollar that's not spent or that is spent on profit for the company, that's spent on lobbying, that's spent on all of the executive salaries, all the things they do, is money that's not going into the service. And so you have that layer of profit on top. And the assumption is that private enterprise can manage these things more efficiently than the public sector. And that has not been shown to be true over and over and over again, in fact. And so this is really dangerous to have a huge company like Veolia now get even bigger and be in a position to benefit from this infrastructure package. I feel like some guardrails need to be put in around privatization and public-private partnerships, so that this new set of resources isn't just siphoned off.
You can read more about that at prospect.org. David Dayen, thank you for that bonus material there, and thank you for taking time to join us today.
All right, Mitch, thanks.